My name is Alex. I'm 24, and up until a few weeks ago, my life was as unremarkable as the beige walls of my rented apartment. I worked a dead-end job in IT support, spent my evenings playing video games, and my weekends trying to convince myself that I was enjoying the fleeting freedom of youth. Nothing extraordinary ever happened to me. I was the kind of guy who blended into crowds, whose existence was a quiet hum in the background of the world. That's why what happened, what is happening, feels so profoundly wrong, so utterly out of place in the mundane tapestry of my life. It's like a vibrant, screaming splash of crimson on a canvas of muted grays. It all started with the house. Not just any house, but the house. You know, the one in every town, the one with the overgrown yard, the boarded-up windows, the whispers clinging to its decaying porch like cobwebs? Yeah, that one. Ours was on Elmwood Street, a few blocks from my apartment. I'd walked past it 1,000 times, barely registering it beyond a fleeting thought about how creepy it looked or a vague curiosity about who owned it. It was just part of the scenery, a local legend for bored teenagers. The Blackwood House, they called it, though I never knew why. No one named Blackwood had lived there for decades, if ever. The story went that a family had vanished from it overnight, leaving everything behind. Half-eaten meals on the table, clothes in the dresser, toys scattered on the floor. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, just gone. The police investigated, of course, but found nothing. The house stood empty after that, a silent monument to an unsolved mystery, slowly succumbing to the elements and the creeping tendrils of local folklore. Most people just dismissed it as an urban myth, a fun little spook story for Halloween. I certainly did. Until the notice. It appeared on my desk at work, a small, unassuming memo from HR. They were upgrading the network infrastructure for a few properties the company owned, and my team was assigned to the Elmwood Street location. My stomach dropped when I saw the address, 142 Elmwood Street, the Blackwood House. A wave of unease, cold and sharp, washed over me. It was irrational, I knew, just an old house, but the stories, the hushed tones of kids daring each other to touch the fence, the way the shadows seemed to cling to its gables even on the brightest day, it all came rushing back. My colleague, Mark, a burly guy who scoffed at anything he couldn't fix with a wrench, slapped me on the back. "Looks like you drew the short straw, Alex. Heard that place is a real dump. Probably got more spiders than wires." He laughed, but I couldn't join in. The next morning, armed with a toolkit and a healthy dose of skepticism, I drove to the house. The gate creaked open with a groan that sounded suspiciously like a sigh. The lawn was a jungle of weeds, and the porch steps sagged precariously. The front door, a heavy oak monstrosity, was ajar, revealing a cavernous, dust-filled hallway. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every rustle of leaves outside. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the faint, cloying scent of decay and something else. Something metallic, like old blood, or perhaps just rust. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on what felt like decades of accumulated dust and debris. The silence was profound, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through broken panes made me jump. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the eerie atmosphere of an abandoned house, the kind of place that naturally played tricks on your mind. My job was to assess the existing wiring and plan for the new installation. I started in the living room, a large space dominated by a massive soot-stained fireplace. The wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing layers of faded patterns beneath. Furniture, covered in white sheets, stood like ghostly sentinels. As I pulled back a sheet from what looked like an armchair, a cloud of dust erupted, making me cough. Beneath it, the fabric was rotted, crumbling to the touch. I moved to the walls, tracing the path of old electrical conduits. That's when I saw it. Not on the wall, but in it. A small, almost imperceptible crack running vertically from the floor to about eye level. It wasn't a structural crack. It looked deliberate, like something had been cut, then poorly patched over. My curiosity, overriding my apprehension, got the better of me. I ran my fingers along it, feeling a slight ridge. I pulled out a small utility knife from my kit and carefully began to scrape away the plaster along the crack. It flaked off easily, revealing not brick or wood, but something dark and smooth beneath. As more plaster fell away, a faint, sickly sweet smell wafted out, different from the general decay of the house. It was cloying, almost floral, but with an unsettling undertone, like something that had gone bad. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was this? I widened the opening, and then I saw it clearly. Behind the thin layer of plaster, embedded in the wall, was a small, crudely carved wooden doll. Its eyes were two black beads, staring blankly ahead. Its limbs were stiff, disproportionately long, and it was wrapped in a piece of faded, blood-stained cloth. I recoiled, a gasp catching in my throat. This wasn't just an old house. This was something else entirely. The air in the room suddenly felt colder, heavier. The silence pressed in, no longer just empty, but expectant. I stared at the doll, its vacant gaze seeming to bore into me, and a chilling thought solidified in my mind. This wasn't just a forgotten toy. This was placed here, hidden. And the bloodstain? It looked old, but undeniably real. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from a primal fear that had nothing to do with faulty wiring or dusty furniture. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to get out, to run from this house and never look back. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached my ears. A whisper. It seemed to come from deeper within the house, from the shadows at the end of the hallway. It was too soft to make out words, just a breathy, drawn-out sibilance, like air escaping from a deflating balloon. My rational mind screamed at me to ignore it, to pack up my tools and leave. But another part of me, a morbid, foolish part, felt a pull, a strange compulsion to investigate. I took a deep, shaky breath, my eyes still fixed on the doll in the wall. It felt like it was watching me, waiting. And then, as if on cue, the whisper came again, a little louder this time, carrying a faint, mournful cadence. It was calling me. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I shouldn't go. But my feet, as if guided by an unseen force, began to move towards the hallway, towards the source of that chilling, ethereal sound. The shadows deepened with every step, swallowing the last vestiges of the fading daylight. I was walking into something I couldn't comprehend, something that felt ancient and malevolent, and I had a terrifying premonition that once I stepped into its embrace, I might never truly leave. The whisper pulled me in. It wasn't loud, not by any stretch, but it was insistent, a siren song laced with dread. My hand was still outstretched towards the creepy wooden doll in the wall, my fingers brushing against its cold, smooth surface. It felt wrong, utterly wrong, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. Its black bead eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, almost as if reflecting some unseen source. My mind, usually a chaotic mess of half-formed thoughts and pop culture references, was eerily clear, focused solely on that sound. I remember the distinct chill that seemed to emanate from the deeper parts of the house, a cold that seeped into my bones, unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just the dampness of an old abandoned building. It was an active, oppressive cold, like walking into a meat locker on a summer day. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to run, to smash through the front door and never look back. But my feet, those treacherous things, just kept moving. One slow, hesitant step after another, deeper into the house's suffocating embrace. The hallway stretched out before me, a tunnel of shadows. The faded floral wallpaper was peeling in long, curling strips, resembling flayed skin. The air grew heavier, thicker, making it hard to draw a full breath. It smelled even more strongly now of that strange, sweet decay, mixed with something else, something metallic and sharp, like the tang of old pennies. As I moved further, the whispers became clearer, though still not intelligible words. They sounded like multiple voices layered over each other, a low, mournful chorus that vibrated through the very floorboards beneath my feet. It was a cacophony of sorrow and anguish, and it made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I clutched the flashlight from my toolkit, its beam a weak, trembling shield against the encroaching darkness. The hallway ended in a wide archway, leading into what must have been the dining room. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a long, heavy wooden table, still set with tarnished silverware and dusty, empty plates. It was exactly as the legend said, a meal abandoned mid-course, frozen in time. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. It looked so personal, so sudden, as if the people sitting there had simply evaporated into thin air. And then I saw it, or rather felt it, a presence. It wasn't visible, not yet, but the air around me became even colder, the whispers intensifying, swirling around me like invisible currents. I stood frozen, my eyes darting around the room, trying to pinpoint this oppressive feeling. My breath hitched in my throat. On the table, amidst the dusty plates, was another one of those dolls. Smaller this time, tucked almost entirely under a plate, as if someone had tried to hide it in a hurry. Its dark bead eyes seemed to glow faintly, reflecting the dim light from my flashlight. And next to it, partially obscured by a crumpled napkin, was a child's drawing. It was crudely done, but unmistakably depicted a family, 2 adults and a small child holding hands. But the figures were faceless, just blank ovals where eyes and mouths should have been. And scribbled underneath, in what looked like faded red crayon, were 3 unsettling symbols, like distorted eyes with tears streaming from them. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. These weren't just coincidences. This wasn't just an abandoned house. This was a stage. And these dolls, these drawings, they felt like props, a macabre play left unfinished. As I stared at the drawing, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They coalesced, forming something that sounded disturbingly like a child's mournful wail, barely audible beneath the other, deeper whispers. It was a sound that twisted my gut, a sound of profound loss and terror. My hand trembled, and the flashlight beam danced wildly across the room. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind tore through the house, rattling the remaining panes of glass in the windows. dust swirled, and the white sheets covering the furniture billowed like spectral figures. A door at the far end of the dining room, one I hadn't noticed before, slowly creaked open, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness. The whispers converged there, seeming to beckon me, drawing me towards that black abyss. My mind was screaming at me to run, to bolt for the door and never look back. But my feet were rooted to the spot, my body paralyzed by a fear that was both exhilarating and utterly terrifying. It was the kind of fear that numbs you, that strips away all rational thought and leaves you utterly vulnerable. And then I saw it. A flicker of movement in the doorway. So fleeting, so quick, that I almost convinced myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my overwrought imagination. But I knew what I saw. A shadow. Not just a patch of darkness, but a defined shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, elongated and unnaturally thin. It seemed to stretch, to writhe, as if struggling to take shape, and it moved slowly, deliberately, into the dining room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was constricted, dry. The shadow advanced, its form becoming clearer, more distinct. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch and contort. It had no discernible features, just an absence of light, a void. And yet I felt its gaze, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. As it drew closer, the cold intensified, becoming unbearable. My teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. The air grew heavy with that sweet, cloying smell, now mingled with a new scent, something sharp and acrid like ozone after a lightning strike. The whispers were all around me, a chaotic chorus of despair, louder than ever, pressing in on all sides. I could almost make out words now, fragmented and distorted, but enough to send a fresh wave of terror through me. Lost, can't leave, trapped. The shadow stopped a few feet from me. It didn't make a sound, yet I felt a profound sense of malice radiating from it, a silent scream of pure, unadulterated evil. It towered over me, its form flickering at the edges as if constantly shifting. I could feel my body trembling uncontrollably, my muscles screaming for release. And then a sound cut through the cacophony of whispers. A single, distinct word, spoken in a voice that was both ancient and childlike, raw and desolate. It resonated through the room, through my very bones, shaking me to my core. Mine. It wasn't a question, it was a declaration. And as the word faded, the shadow stretched out an elongated, formless arm towards me. It was slow, deliberate, as if savoring the moment. I tried to move, to scream, to defend myself, but I was utterly paralyzed, a deer caught in headlights. The darkness at the end of the hall seemed to surge forward, threatening to consume me. My vision began to blur at the edges, the world tilting precariously. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, filling my lungs. I could feel the cold hand of the shadow reaching for me, a chill that promised to extinguish everything within me. Just before the darkness consumed my vision entirely, I caught one last glimpse of the doll in the dining room, its bead eyes seeming to glow with a malevolent light fixed on me. And then everything went black. The blackness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a profound, suffocating void. It felt like being submerged in thick oil, every breath a struggle, every muscle screaming against an unseen pressure. My ears rang with a deafening silence, a stark contrast to the cacophony of whispers that had just assaulted me. I was aware of my body, strangely, as if I was floating, completely untethered. There was no up, no down, just an infinite, crushing emptiness. Then, just as I thought I might simply cease to exist, a new sensation pierced through the void. Cold. Not the damp, ancient cold of the house, but a searing, almost burning cold that felt like liquid nitrogen coursing through my veins. It was excruciating, sharp, and it brought with it a jolt of raw pain that shocked me back towards consciousness. My eyes snapped open, or at least I think they did. The darkness remained, but it was no longer absolute. There was a faint, pulsating glow, a deep, sickly red that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was like looking through blood-stained glass, everything tinged with an unsettling crimson hue. I could feel my own ragged breaths, sharp and painful in my lungs. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum trying to break free. I was lying on something hard and cold, and a wave of nausea washed over me as I realized it was concrete. My body ached, every joint screaming in protest. I pushed myself up, my limbs heavy and uncooperative. The red glow intensified slightly, allowing me to make out my surroundings. I was in a basement, a vast, cavernous space far larger than the footprint of the house above suggested. The walls were rough, unmortared stone, dripping with moisture. The air was thick with the same sweet, metallic scent I'd noticed upstairs, but here it was overwhelming, almost suffocating. It smelled like a slaughterhouse, or perhaps an old, forgotten grave. The red light, I soon discovered, came from various points around the vast space. Small, flickering torches embedded in niches in the stone walls, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced and writhed with every gust of stale air. As my eyes adjusted, I saw things in the shadows that made my blood run cold. There were crude altars, fashioned from rough-hewn stone, smeared with what looked like dried, dark stains. On them, scattered amidst what looked like dried herbs and desiccated flowers, were more of those wooden dolls, dozens of them. Some small, like the one I found in the wall upstairs. Others were larger, almost life-sized, with limbs bent at unnatural angles, their bead eyes staring blankly into the oppressive gloom. They weren't just dolls, they were effigies, each one emanating a faint, unsettling aura, as if they held a tiny piece of some long-dead, suffering soul. My gaze was drawn to the center of the vast space, where a large circular pit had been dug into the concrete floor. It was shallow, perhaps only a foot deep, but its edges were stained a dark, rusty brown. And in the very center of the pit, illuminated by the flickering red light, was a symbol. It was complex, ancient, etched deeply into the concrete. It looked like a series of intertwined circles with sharp, jagged lines radiating outwards, reminiscent of distorted eyes. It pulsed faintly, in sync with the red light, and I felt a chill that transcended mere coldness, a dread that clawed at the deepest parts of my being. This was not just an old house. This was a place of dark ritual, a place where something truly horrifying had transpired. And then I heard them again, the whispers. They weren't just mournful now, they were angry, desperate, a chorus of tormented voices echoing off the stone walls. They seemed to rise from the pit, from the very air around the dolls. I strained to hear, to make sense of the fragmented sounds, and this time, clear as day, I heard a word, repeated over and over, chillingly distinct. Sacrifice. My blood ran cold. Sacrifice. The vanishing family, the abandoned meal, the bloodstains. It all clicked into place, a horrific mosaic forming in my mind. This wasn't just a simple disappearance. This was something far more sinister, something orchestrated, something ancient. A sudden movement in the shadows made me jump. My head snapped up, my eyes darting frantically. At the far end of the basement, beyond the circle of torches, stood a figure. It was the shadow from upstairs, but here, in the deeper darkness, it was more defined, more solid. It was still impossibly tall, its form rippling at the edges, but now I could almost discern features. Not a face, not truly, but a vague impression of hollowed-out eyes, a gaping maw, and elongated skeletal limbs. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, gliding towards me like a predatory phantom. Panic seized me, a primal, overwhelming urge to flee. I scrambled backwards, my hands scraping against the rough concrete floor. My muscles were screaming, but adrenaline coursed through me, injecting a desperate strength. I had to get out. I had to warn someone. But the figure was moving faster now, its strides silent and unnervingly long. The whispers intensified, rising to a cacophony of screams, not human screams, but something far more guttural, more ancient. It felt like the very walls were crying out in agony. The dolls in the niches seemed to vibrate, their bead eyes glowing brighter with a malevolent red light. I scrambled to my feet, my legs wobbly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I turned and ran, blindly, towards the nearest set of stone steps I could see, hoping they led somewhere, anywhere, away from this place. The shadow was right behind me. I could feel its frigid presence, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I clawed my way up the steps, tripping and stumbling, each step an agonizing effort. The screams from the basement intensified, accompanied now by a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very stone. I glanced over my shoulder, and through the flickering red light, I saw it. The shadow was at the base of the stairs, its elongated arm reaching for me, its form stretching, distorting into something truly monstrous. I pushed harder, my lungs burning, my legs aching. Finally, I burst through a flimsy wooden door at the top of the stairs, finding myself in what looked like a disused pantry off the kitchen. The faint daylight from the windows upstairs seemed impossibly far away, a beacon of hope in this nightmare. I didn't stop. I ran through the kitchen, through the dining room, past the table with the abandoned meal, past the doll in the wall that now seemed to watch me with a knowing, malevolent gaze. The front door was still ajar, a sliver of the outside world, of sanity. I burst out into the overgrown yard, gasping for air, the sunlight a blinding, blessed relief. I didn't look back. I ran through the tangled weeds, past the creaking gate, and didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands trembled so violently I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove away, speeding down Elmwood Street, leaving the Blackwood House behind. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold all over again. In one of the upper windows, shrouded in the deepening shadows of the late afternoon, I saw a figure. Tall and impossibly thin. It was just a fleeting glimpse, a trick of the light perhaps, but its form was unmistakable. It was watching me. And as I drove further away, my heart still pounding, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that house. Something ancient, something malevolent, and that this was only the beginning. The stories were real, and I, Alex, the unremarkable guy, had just become a part of them. The question was, would I ever be able to escape? The drive home was a blur of frantic thoughts and white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. Every shadow seemed to stretch. Every creak of the car sounded like something breathing behind me. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that towering, formless figure materializing in the back seat. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. A suffocating blanket draped over my shoulders. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, the familiar concrete and mundane cars felt like a sanctuary. I practically sprinted up the stairs, fumbling with my keys, my heart still hammering against my ribs. Inside, the beige walls that I'd once found so unremarkable now offered a comforting blandness. I locked the door, then locked it again and again, as if multiple deadbolts could somehow keep out what I'd encountered. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, an overactive imagination fueled by old legends and the creepy atmosphere of an abandoned house. But the cold dread that still clung to me, the vivid images of those dolls, the symbols, and that suffocating shadow, they were too real, too visceral to be dismissed as mere fantasy. My hands were still shaking, and I could still smell that sickly sweet metallic scent clinging to my clothes, to my skin. I stripped off my work clothes, throwing them into a pile in the corner, feeling as if they were contaminated. I stood under the hottest shower I could tolerate, scrubbing my skin raw, trying to wash away the lingering sense of the house, of its presence. But it was no use. The feeling had seeped into my bones, a chilling awareness that something had fundamentally shifted in my world. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the window sent a jolt of terror through me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events in the Blackwood House. The whispers, the dolls, the pit in the basement, the shadow, and that single, chilling word, mine. It echoed in the silence of my apartment, a pronouncement of ownership. The next day, I called in sick. I couldn't bring myself to go back to work, knowing that the company expected me to return to that house. I made up some story about a severe stomach bug, hoping my voice didn't betray the sheer terror I was battling. My manager, bless his oblivious heart, just grunted and told me to get well soon. I spent the day researching the Blackwood House online, devouring every scrap of information I could find. Most of it was the same old urban legend stuff, but buried deep in an obscure local history forum, I found something different. A dusty, digitized newspaper clipping from the 1930s. It was an article about a series of disappearances in the area. Not just the family from the Blackwood House, but others too. Children mostly, always vanishing without a trace. The article mentioned strange symbols found near the last known locations, symbols that vaguely resembled the one in the basement pit. The police had no leads, nothing concrete, and eventually the cases went cold. The paper had attributed it to roving vagrants or child abductions, but the undertone of helplessness was palpable. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a family. This was a pattern. And the dolls, the rituals, the shadow, it all pointed to something ancient, something that had been preying on this town for decades, perhaps even longer. The house wasn't just a location. It was a conduit, a trap. Days turned into a week. I barely left my apartment, jumping at every shadow, every unexpected sound. My phone rang constantly with calls from work, but I ignored them. I was too consumed by the creeping paranoia, the gnawing certainty that it wasn't over, that it wasn't done with me. Then the dreams started. Vivid, terrifying nightmares where I was back in the basement, surrounded by the dolls, the screams of children echoing in the dark. The shadow would loom over me, its form flickering, and I'd feel that icy, possessive touch. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, gasping for air, the smell of decay and ozone still in my nostrils. One night, I woke up feeling an intense cold, even though my apartment was warm. I opened my eyes, and there, standing at the foot of my bed, was a fleeting, translucent form. It was taller than any human, its outline hazy, shimmering like heat haze over asphalt. It had no features, just an elongated, indistinct shape, darker than the surrounding dimness. It was the shadow. It was in my apartment. I wanted to scream, but my throat was paralyzed, my lungs frozen. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, just watching me. I could feel its gaze, a suffocating weight that pressed down on my chest, stealing my breath. And then a whisper, faint but clear, resonated in my mind, not in my ears. Soon. Then it was gone, dissolving into the air like smoke. I bolted upright, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for the light switch, bathing the room in harsh, immediate light. There was nothing there, just my ordinary bedroom, my ordinary, unremarkable life. But the cold lingered, and the faint, sweet, metallic scent was undeniable. I knew then that I couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't confined to the house. It had found me. It was here. My attempts to rationalize it, to dismiss it as a hallucination or stress, crumbled under the weight of that undeniable presence. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Tell them what? That a shadow demon was haunting me because I touched a doll in a haunted house? They'd lock me up. Tell my friends? They'd think I'd lost my mind. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone in this. The next morning, as I sat on my couch, nursing a cold cup of coffee, I noticed something on my arm. A small mark just above my wrist. It was faint, barely visible, but unmistakable. 3 small red lines, like distorted eyes with tears streaming from them. The same symbols from the child's drawing in the Blackwood House, etched onto my skin. A wave of absolute, bone-chilling dread washed over me. It wasn't just watching me, it was marking me. And I suddenly understood. The disappearances, the unfinished meals, the dolls. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was part of the story. I was next. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my manager. "Alex, need you back at Elmwood. Network's down again. Get over there ASAP." I stared at the message, then at the symbol on my arm. My blood ran cold, but this time it was mixed with a terrifying clarity. The house was calling me back, and I knew with a horrifying certainty
that I had no choice but to answer. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. And I was no longer just the player. I was the pawn.